so much. Thank you so much, Mara. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you today as we are learning our Torah portion. And just a quick word before we jump into the sources. We're going to do things a little differently than I usually do when I teach my Jewish learning group Torah study, which I really love doing. And I'm so happy to be back with all of you again today. We are going to be looking mostly at commentaries on the Parsha. We're not going to be doing as deep of a textual read, although we are going to start by looking at a few very famous psukim in this week's Parsha. Now, when I say this week's Parsha, usually that is a uniform term, by which I mean that when I say this week's Parsha, there's usually only one Parsha of the week. This week it's different. This week and for the next 5 or 6, I don't remember exactly how many Shabbatot, but this week, or really starting last week, for the next 5 or 6 weeks through Parashat Pinchas, there are actually 2 different Parshiot being read in the Jewish world each week. That has to do with the calendar. In the land of Israel, the Parasha of the week is Bahalotcha, which is next week's Parasha outside of Israel in the diaspora. And the reason for this is that Shavuot is observed in many, but not all diaspora communities for 2 days. And because of that, last Shabbat was the second day of Shavuot for many, but not all. And I'm saying many, but not all, because I'm going to address the Reform calendar in a second. Many of us, myself included, my community included, observed 2 days of Shavuot. Therefore, last Shabbat, we read from Devarim, from the book of Deuteronomy, about financial need and about creating a just society and about all the 3 Chagim. We read the reading that we read at the end of each of the Shalosh Regalim, of each of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. However, in communities, all communities in the land of Israel and many communities outside of the land of Israel only keep Shavuot for 1 day. And as such, last Shabbat was a standard typical Shabbat when the Torah reading cycle would just keep going forward. And in the Reform movement in the United States, I can't speak for the Reform movement anywhere else, and I'm speaking second-handedly. I'm not myself a Reform rabbi. I'm a conservative rabbi, but I understand that this is the Reform movement position. So anyone who is a Reform rabbi or a Reform cantor or a Reform professional who knows better, please chime into the chat. But my understanding of the Reform Luach, or the Reform calendar, is that last Shabbat, the Reform movement read half of Nasso and is going to finish up Nasso this week to be in line with the rest of the diaspora community's Torah reading cycle. That is a long way of saying we are learning Parashat Nasso this week. So for those of you who've already read Parashat Nasso, I really hope that this will be a moment of chazara, of review. And for those who will be reading Nasso tomorrow, I hope that this is going to be a moment of looking forward to what's to come. So a couple of things about Parashat Nasso. It's the second parasha in the book of Numbers in Sefer Bamidbar. This parasha is the longest of the year in terms of the number of psukim. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the readings for Hanukkah are actually in this week's parasha as well, because there's a whole long process of different heads of tribes bringing particular gifts to the Mishkan. In this parasha, we also have the laws about the Nazir and the Sotah, which we're not going to delve into, but I really want to, from the very get-go of this shiur, name that Nasso is an extraordinarily difficult part of Torah and very painful for many of us. There are lots of really, really fabulous commentaries on Sotah in particular, which has to do with a woman who is accused of adultery by her jealous husband, and the process that is then gone through to determine whether or not she is quote unquote guilty or innocent. We could unpack that for hours about the extraordinarily unfair ways in which Sotah gets done. There's a whole process in the Torah for that. There are lots of different ways that the tradition has understood that. And I really, really want to encourage folks to seek out sources that address those issues directly. And we are very blessed to live in a world now where more and more commentators of all genders, but particularly women, are addressing those things. So that is something that I encourage folks to do today and over Shabbat. We also have, as I mentioned, the laws of the Nazir, which is a really interesting practice of abstention from particular kinds of things. Any of you who are on this call who have been involved with My Jewish Learning's Daf Yomi project will know that Nazir and Sotah were tractates that were just learned recently in the cycle. So it might be interesting to go back and look at the actual psukim inside in their original context in the Torah, and then to zoom out and think about if you learned any of those tractates, kind of how that manifests. So what I want to do today, we're going to be looking at a series of longer commentaries about bracha, because one of the most famous pieces in our Parshat this week is the priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, which at the end of Tractate Sotah, there is not Sotah. Well, actually, there is a little bit in Sotah, but in Tractate Brachot, in Mishnah Brachot, there's a very long and extended discussion about Birkat Kohanim and how that would be used in a prayer service. We are going to be looking at the verses in the Torah itself, and those are found on the source sheet, which thank you so much, Mara, for putting that into the chat. I would love to invite someone to read aloud in the English or in the Hebrew, as is your preference. Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 through 27. If we have anyone who would be open to reading those aloud, please raise your hands and I'll invite Mara to call on you.
Great. Thank you, Cantor Mark.
Hey, that's a little small. Yeah. This is a prayer for a revolution. I call it Messianic consciousness. Is that what you're at? Oh, no.
Oh,
Or
we're
do you
looking
want
at
to speak
source
to?
one.
Speak to Aaron. The Lord spoke to Moses. Speak to Aaron and his sons. Thus shall you bless the people of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. The Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace. Thus shall they link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them.
Thank you so much, Cantor Mark. I really appreciate your beautiful reading of that. And I think that this particular piece of text is so terse and so profound. I am part of a meditation community that meets on Friday mornings. And so this morning when we met, we learned with our teacher, Aviva Chernik, from her teacher, Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, who talks about how in this threefold bracha, in this series of blessings, we are blessed with three different things. And I'm saying this now in the name of Aviva and in the name of Sheila with my own kind of gloss on it, that we are blessed with safety, that Hashem says, may Hashem bless you and guard you or and keep you or grant you safety. So we might say that as may we feel safe in all of the ways that we need to. May we have kindness and graciousness bestowed upon us. And may we always place before us peace. May there be peace everywhere and in everything. So this is one of those brachot in the Jewish tradition that is so incredibly famous that it almost becomes mundane. So what I want to do now is I want to invite folks in the chat to just put some thoughts or comments in. And Mara, if you don't mind, I'm going to invite you to read a couple of those out, if that's okay. I'd love to hear from folks kind of like what this evokes for you when you hear it, when you read it, when you experience it. This blessing gets experienced many ways. It is part of the traditional Shacharit service. So every morning, it shows up in several places. It first shows up right after the blessings of Torah study. It's the first piece of Torah that we are to learn. I think there's something incredibly powerful about that we make a blessing, Lasot K'divrei Torah. We bless and we ask and we put forward a kavanah that we are fully immersed in the words of Torah. And what is the first thing that we actually learn then after we are immersed in that? We read, we absorb this bracha, this blessing into our lives. I know in my own spiritual practice, sometimes when I'm davening shacharit, it feels so habituated that I often don't take the time to pause. And that's what we're trying to do today in our learning together, is really pause and think about this bracha and all that it brings to us. We also encounter this later in the Amidah, if we are davening in a community setting, where there's a full repetition of the Amidah, we'll hear this after the modim, after the expression of gratitude and the expression of Hakarat HaTov. We hear this bracha being enchanted. In many communities, the Kohanim, the priests of the congregation, or I shouldn't say the priests of the congregation, it's a little bit of misnomer. The Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, will actually make this bracha. And I imagine that there may be some folks in this room who have performed that role. Some communities that happens every day, particularly in the land of Israel. Some communities that happens on the high holidays and on the 3 festivals. And so there are lots of different ways in which that happens. And it's also a blessing that parents give children on Friday nights traditionally. So some of you tonight, as you're getting ready for your Shabbos dinner, some of you may be saying this bracha. So it's really tremendously powerful. And I want to now invite Mara, if you don't mind, just reading a couple of comments out of the chat.
Sure. We have some really beautiful comments. Joy says, I have an emotional response when I hear these words. Hopeful I am worthy of these blessings. And I echo that. But I hope we're all worthy of brachot. And wow, they're all coming in quickly. People are talking about how it is a very comfortable bracha. It offers comfort. Mel mentioned when his wife passed, his rabbi came in and offered this blessing, and it was quite comforting. And that's beautiful. And Mel, we're sorry for your loss. A lot of people are echoing what you said, Rabbi, that this is something that they offer to their children, maybe on Friday night, or at other times.
Yeah, there's never a bad time to offer this bracha, in my opinion. There really is never a bad time.
And Cantor Mark mentioned that he has even written his own melody to it and performs it at interfaith weddings as well.
Oh wow, Kendra Mark, if you could drop your melody, if it's available for folks to listen to, into the chat, I'm sure that many of us would be really grateful for that. So that's a phenomenal segue into what I was going to say, which is that there are beautiful renditions of this, beautiful musical renditions, and I really, really want to encourage folks to look those up, to get a handle on those. Yes, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to invite, trying to think of, we have several lengthier commentaries that I provided folks. We're not going to cover this entire sheet today, simply because it's like the Torah here is absolutely beautiful, and it is lengthy, and we want to make sure we have plenty of time to have conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit of the next text, which is source 2. Unless we have somebody who would be interested in reading source 2, I may interrupt you occasionally as you're reading, or we may invite some discussion. This source, I failed, and I want to ask her apology. I forgot to note in the attribution that Risha Groner is now Rabbi Risha Groner. So mazal tov to Rabbi Risha Groner, a friend and colleague who writes a beautiful Parshat newsletter through her website called The Genesis. If you just Google Risha Groner, it should come up. I think it is now, it's back in production. It went on hiatus for a while. It's really beautiful Torah each Friday. I think that it hasn't gone out yet for today, so there probably would still be time to subscribe to get this week's edition. So anyone who would like, is there anyone who would be interested? It starts with, this is a prayer for a revolution. Anyone want to jump in and read this text?
Yes, thank you
Sure.
so much, Natasha.
Thank you, Natasha.
Okay. Where should I start reading?
This is a prayer for a revolution.
Okay. This is a prayer for a revolution. I call it Messianic consciousness. The Kabbalistic tradition tells us the Messiah isn't just about an old man riding up on a donkey, telling us that the world has achieved a perfected state. It's a process of refining, sifting, and elevating darkness into light that will result in a completely transformed universe. It is a cosmic shift that comes about through the work we do. And right now, the work is cut out for us. Are we ready to do this step by step, knowing that this time we can actually harness the change we have all been praying for? The Parsha of the priestly blessing. In this Parsha, the famous lines of the blessing uttered by the priests to the people of Israel is quoted. An ancient prayer, a blessing that is spoken around the world from parents to children, from community leaders to their communities, to couples under the chuppah, and to children on Friday evenings and on the eve of Yom Kippur, to communities standing together, hoping and praying for just a taste of peace. It fits that rather than talking through the Parsha of the week, we take a deep breath, open our hands, place them on our hearts, and recite these blessings to ourselves and to the world. May God bless you and protect. May God shine God's presence upon you and be gracious to you. May God lift God's presence toward you and place peace upon you.
Thank you, Natasha, so much for that beautiful reading. Right, and I think, and a couple of words I want to say about her commentary here. I think that it's really interesting that Risha talks about this prayer being related to Messianic consciousness in a Kabbalistic tradition. And that is really a lineage that she is very well steeped in, and something that I think she brings beautifully into her Torah that she continues to teach, that it's not simply about, as it says in the beginning of the commentary, it's not simply about, an old man riding on a donkey, right? It's actually mamash. It's very much about the work we do to bring about a time of peace. So it relates very much, I think, to what we talked about before, that many of us find this prayer to be very, very comforting. Many of us are really grounded by it. That's certainly been my experience, that there's really nothing like hearing it or receiving it even directly. That this deeply ancient text of ours, which might actually be the oldest prayer that we have in our tradition, is something that is so profoundly a part of the Jewish people and of the Jewish tradition that it's there. It's like I don't even know the right word to describe it. It's just so deeply fundamental to who we are. And I want to open it up now. If folks can raise their Zoom hand, Mara, if you don't mind, could we call on a few folks in the order that their hands are raised? What I'm going to do is I want to hear everyone's comments first, and then I'm going to offer a response. So we'll take like 2 or 3 comments at a time.
Great. Just to repeat what Rabbi Lauren said, if you have any thoughts or questions about what we've read so far, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand. Great. I will call on Jay.
I posted in the chat that I find it interesting that the blessing is given by Aaron and his sons, the priests, and yet we as parents and leaders use the same blessing, though most of us are not priests.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Thank you for that, Jay. I will definitely address. Do we have any other comments, or should I respond to that now?
Sure. We have Heidi, and Cantor Mark also has his.
Okay, so why don't we hear from Heidi and Cantor Mark, and then I will respond to everyone at once.
Hi, I think what crosses my mind when I hear that this is an old ancient prayer, that my feeling is that this is distinctive among the Jewish people, even at that time. And I can't help but wonder that this is probably a breakthrough in how people were interacting with their concept of the divine, because it implies a certain relationship and a certain quality to the divine. And I'm kind of curious and thinking out loud that this is a break from what people had been experiencing around them.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, let's hear from Kendra Mark, and then I'll respond to everyone at once.
Sure. When I do a translation of it in English as part of my the melodies that I sing, and I was inspired by one of my interfaith colleagues, Father Jerry Bellamy, who said to me, you know, God is not a light switch. You don't turn God on and off by pointing at the sun or saying a particular prayer or whatever. All of this work, even this blessing, is to get our own heads, our attitudes, our unwillingness to connect with God out of the way. So this is a very powerful way of communicating with the awareness of God. But God isn't like responding like, okay, I said the blessing, now God's going to give you the blessing. It isn't like that. So what I translated is, God blesses you and safeguards you. God's light lights up your way. God's face is always turned to you and brings you peace each day.
Sorry, what?
Beg your pardon? Oh, somebody else is talking.
Someone is unmuted. If folks could please be muted unless you're speaking, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
And
Sorry about
I
that.
do not have a recording of me doing it. So if you want me to sing it at the end, I'll be happy to if there's time.
Oh, thank you. I think I may take you up on that.
Okay.
Hold tight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, that I want to respond to everyone and start by saying that, Kendra Mark, I think that your beautiful interpretation of the bracha is stunning, in that exactly, like, this is not, you know, very much related also to Heidi, what you said, and also to Jay. This is not, the way that I understand this bracha, this is not about, you know, an external like experience that's sort of like a vertical, like Hashem is up there and we are down here. And yes, there is a notion of shefa, right? Like a divine flow that goes from us, you know, from Hashem to us, or from the Kohanim to us. But I think also to Rabbi Mark, to Kendra Mark, what you were saying, that there is that constancy, right? That it's not, as you said, a light switch. I love how your colleague put that, right? We don't turn God off. You know, it's like, it's not like, you know, you turn the light off. That's not how this works, right? So, but the challenge, I think, for a lot of us today, certainly for myself, and I imagine for many of us, and this is true, you know, the 20th century really challenged a lot of our theology. And thank God, from my perspective, Baruch Hashem, we are living in a world now where, for many of us, and I think more and more people in the Jewish world are becoming connected to this, and I hope that this continues, that we have a lot of work to do around helping everyone feel that bracha actually is manifest. On the one hand, we have a lot of work to do. There are a lot of ways in which people feel deeply excluded by the Jewish community, in ways that we can work on. And that is true. And also, we are living at a time of incredible flourishing of Jewish spirituality and incredible flourishing of different ways of connecting to the sacred. And so this bracha, and we'll see this in the next commentary we read, this bracha itself is a huge way in to that kind of exploration, that we are understanding that, just as is true in lots of other traditions, the Jewish tradition actually has many, many names for God. We could probably sit here and come up with a really extensive list of how many names for God are there in the Jewish tradition. And I think if we were to do that, we would realize that the way that we understand God as this king, I mean, right in the prayer, right? What is the formula of a bracha? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, ruler or sovereign, right? That's not the only appellation. That's not the only name for God. So when we look at this bracha, we know that when it says, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, right? We know that actually that name there that we pronounce as Adonai when we are praying is actually the tetragrammaton of Yud Kei Vav Kei, of Yud Hey Vav Hey, which we do not pronounce because we do not have the pronunciation. But as Reb Zolman and folks who are more conversant with renewal, they correct me, as Reb Zolman talks a lot about, right, Yud Kei Vav Kei is the breath of all being. And often people will use the term Havaya as well. There is a lot of really beautiful ways in which things are interpreted, reinterpreted, because the way that people have understood God in the past doesn't work for a lot of people anymore. It doesn't. But that doesn't mean that there isn't room in the tradition. Actually, hahepech, there is lots of room in the tradition for different understandings and interpretations. So I think that ultimately, Heidi, to what you were saying, this is a way to open up what it means to have a relationship with the divine. It doesn't mean only one thing. It doesn't mean, okay, if I believe in God, it means I have to believe in a particular kind of God, or in a God who acts in a very particular way in the world. It's much more complicated than that. So I want to pause here and open it up. If we have any other questions or comments, I'll take a few more. And then we're going to look briefly at a commentary by Rabbi Yael Vivi, and then we're going to turn it over to hear Cantor Mark.
Wonderful. We have 3 hands raised, and Joanne has had their hand raised for quite a time. So we'll go to you.
Okay, we'll start there.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi. I feel like we are in this section of Torah where there are many, many physical prescriptions in order to bring holiness into our lives and the community. And in this particular recipe for how to be physical in this blessing, the hands are held above the head of the recipient with the fingers spread apart to create 5 windows for the light of Hashem to come through. And so it's the ultimate act of being a conduit to receive the blessing. And I think that it's not just in the constants of moment by moment, but it is for eternity and all the way through all of our acts to reach for and hopefully arrive at the Messianic era.
That is beautiful. And that is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Joanna. And also that relates directly to what Rabbi Groner is talking about here. Precisely. We get to every minute of every day act in a way that will bring about about whatever we think about, whatever kind of redeemed world, Messianic consciousness, new era, whatever word we want to use. We have that choice. We live in a world where we know that choice is not being made by many people. And it is my prayer that all of us choose in every moment as much as we can to bring about through our own actions a better world. So thank you. And I know we have 2 more comments.
Yes, we'll go to Jasper and then Sarah.
I'd like somebody to ask Roz to please stop being so rude. All that screen.
Sorry about that. Sarah, please share your comment.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that as someone who has trouble with a lot of the anthropomorphic language we use for the divine, the particular phrasing of this, the translation, can make a big difference to me as to whether or not I can relate to it. I love the way that Cantor Mark translated it. And I really wish that we could somehow get away from the more anthropomorphic language, because I find it really alienating.
Yeah, I hear you. And that is such a brilliant segue into the next piece we're going to look at, because you and many, many, many others, and myself, frankly, find it extraordinarily difficult to relate to and alienating. I want to recommend a book to folks by Rabbi Toba Spitzer called, I think it's called God Was Here Too. It came out very recently, and she's a Reconstructionist rabbi, and she basically, in this book, she has a variety of different metaphors for God that she explores, or maybe I shouldn't say metaphors, different names, because she addresses exactly the question or exactly the quandary that you brought up, right? This is really hard and really alienating for a lot of people. And she says, there are lots of other ways to think about the divine in one's life. And it's an absolutely phenomenal book that I could not recommend more highly. Rabbi Spitzer is the rabbi of a community called Dorsey Tzedek, I believe is what it's called, in Newton, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful, beautiful community.
Rabbi, we're having a few questions in the chat that are asking the name of the book, and I'll add it to the chat.
I think it's either called, and forgive me, I don't have the exact title off the top of my head, but it's either God Was Here or God Was Here Too, and it's by Rabbi Toba Spitzer.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And we have one more hand from Alyssa.
Could you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, because my video isn't working on the computer, so I just wanted to make my volume is. Now, from what I understand with my rabbi, there's 75, possibly a few more names in regard to God, but that the names get used in different ways, and that's why, that they get. Just put this way, I'm trying my best with my wording. I know that there's such thing as adjectives. I know there's such things as adjectives and nouns and everything. It sounds like certain ones, it needs to be said. You know what I'm trying to say?
I think I'm hearing you correctly, and please let me know if I did not. Basically, what I heard you say was that your rabbi said that there are 75, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. I've heard 72, 75, there could be even more than that, names of God, but that some of them are used in different ways than others. If I'm hearing that correctly. So we use, for example, we use Melech a lot more than we use Havaya in a traditional Siddur, right? Although that's changing now that there are more different kinds of Siddurim out there. Or, we don't really use the term makom as much as we might want to, the place, which is one of the terms that Rabbi Spitzer talks about in her book. So, excuse me. And I don't, and I hear what you're saying, are they adjectives? Are they nouns?
You said something about some of them being used in different ways, and that's why we don't that's why we don't say certain ones.
Oh, yes. So the Tetragrammaton, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, is not pronounced because we've lost the pronunciation. There are some people who try to pronounce it, and that is traditionally seen as extraordinarily offensive, actually, in Judaism. There's a way that some folks, particularly in some parts of the Christian world, have pronounced it. I'm not going to say that name because we don't pronounce the name of God, but it's a or we don't pronounce that name because that is seen as, we are so, we can see this in a variety of ways, but one of the ways it's understood is that that particular utterance is so sacred that we are very careful with how we use it. And because we don't have the pronunciation, we therefore don't even try. And we have lots of other names that we use instead.
He taught the Hebrew way. He said, he just says yud yud instead of.
And the reason, and exactly, and you preface my next point exactly, which is that the reason for that is because we are so careful, and I think this is a broader lesson about how we treat things with respect. We are so careful about how we treat texts and holy writings that anything with the name of God on it is automatically taken to a geniza, a particular place for burial. We actually bury it as if it was a physical object. I mean, it is a physical object, but we bury it with a lot of reverence, which is why some people, even in English, will write God G-D. So that's, and I think that can be extrapolated out to a much broader lesson about how we care for things in general, and the way in which we, I believe, as human beings trying to live, the best ways we can really take care of the things and the people and all beings really in our environment with really utmost care and consciousness, which we know in our modern world, a lot of us don't do a lot of the time. So it's a constant reminder and return to that kind of a practice. And before I turn it to Cantor Mark to hear his beautiful rendition, does anyone have any last minute quick comments?
We're having a few questions about the practice of the geniza. So do you mind just sharing briefly one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. So a geniza is a place, it's often a place or a box or something. It's some kind of repository. A lot of synagogues have them, where you can actually drop off any kind of text that has the name of God on it. So a lot of times you'll have old Sidurim or old Chumashim or any kind of Jewish holy text. That then, I don't know the process for how people then actually transport all of the geniza material properly to be buried, but there is a process for actually burying the text. You don't just throw it away. You actually put it very intentionally for burial. The most famous geniza, and it's called the Cairo geniza, and it was discovered by Solomon Schechter in the early 20th century. And literally any kind of Hebrew writing that was possible over centuries and centuries was put into the Cairo geniza, and to the point where there's no organization, because it was literally just a place where you would actually drop all of this off. And it was at a synagogue called the Ben Ezra Synagogue. You literally drop all of the stuff off. So you could have everything as mundane as a grocery bill, if it had some Hebrew on it, to, a copy of the Chumash, a copy of the Torah. So anything and everything. And it's been a real treasure trove for a lot of scholars. It's not an area that I know a ton about, but I know that there's a really beautiful book on it called Sacred Trash, which is about the Cairo geniza. So definitely, if you're interested in that, I would certainly take a look at that.
That's so fascinating, Rabbi. Thank you. And we have lots more comments about God's name in the chat, which I don't know we'll be able to really dive into in these last 4 minutes. But I just wanted to thank you all for your thoughtful questions. And there's a beauty in being able to come back next week and continuing asking questions. But thank you, Cantor Mark. I know that we have a lot of people eagerly awaiting your singing. So I will ask you to unmute and I'll bring back up the source sheet.
Yes, and please do download the source sheet if you can. And I really encourage you to look at the remaining 2 commentaries over Shabbat. They're beautiful.
Where did Cantor Mark go?
I'm right here, but I'm not on the screen because you put up the source sheet.
Huh. Okay.
So
well, then we'll stop share. Here you go.
Rabbi, first I want to thank you. This deep dive into this prayer, which is so meaningful to me. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
To Alyssa's point, Hamakom Yenachem is the name of God for healing, for the holy place of comfort. And I do this at the end of every funeral and form 2 lines and have the mourners pass between everybody as we basically say to them with that expression, may you find the holy place of comfort. It's invoking God at that moment. And thank you for mentioning Rabbi Zalman, because I found out through my dear friend Rabbi Sol that he always wanted to hear the Birkat Kohanim sung to Amazing Grace. So I do it as an homage to him as much as from my soul. Do you want me to do both or just the Amazing Grace one? I think we're pretty much out of time.
Why don't we do your specific melody?
Okay, sure. Yivarech, well, that's the other one. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. 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 Shalom.
Beautiful. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Thus may it be so as our response to each line of that beautiful bracha. I just want to say again what a tremendous bracha it is for me to be able to be part of this ongoing series. I hope to be back again very soon. And thank you, Cantor Mark. Thank you, Mara. Thank you, everyone, for your beautiful questions. And there's so much more. So please dig into the commentaries on the source sheet over Shabbos. I'm going to see if there's a way I can get a few follow-up resources out there as well. And may we all be blessed with a lot of shalom this Shabbos. So wonderful to be with all of you. Shabbat shalom u'mevarach. May you have a blessed Shabbat. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone. Shabbat shalom.